Hey guys, so welcome to Broken Table Church. We have assembled a team together to plant this church. We really feel like the Lord is calling us to plant this. We plan to plant in Newham, London, and the mission of Broken Table Church will be that it exists to engage the lost by sharing the gospel and glorifying God by growing in fellowship together and meeting the needs of the surrounding community. And our vision that will guide our ministries and our purposes will be Broken Table Church will reach every neighborhood in Newham of Muslim faith, Indian, Bangladeshi, Pakistani, in order to bring them to Christ. It's also really important to understand who our leadership team is because they're the people that is going to make this happen. And we're excited to introduce everybody. So our preaching strategist will be Jared. Our discipleship and small group strategist will be Kim. The evangelism strategist is Morgan. The children's ministry strategist is me, Grace Mazinga. And then worship strategist is Deidre Brown. And the financial strategist, we kind of came up with that as a team. So just stay tuned to this video to see what we have planned.
So our focus group at Broken Table Church are the Islamic, Indian, Bangladeshi, and Pakistani immigrants and refugees residing in Newham in London. So about 32% of the people in Newham consider themselves Muslim people. So with that, those are several different ethnic groups within that. Most of them are either Indian, Bangladeshi, or Pakistani, but there are some overlap between other countries as well. It's a very young community in Newham, so most of the population is within the 25 to 35-year-old range, and only 7% of the population is over 60. So it's a very young group. There are a lot of young families with young children. It's a very diverse area in London, so it is one of the most diverse sub-districts within London, and there are over 300 people groups found in Newham alone. So we really want to reach out and have a multicultural church and not just have only the Indian people or only the Bangladeshi or only the Pakistani. We want to kind of have a big mix of all of these different cultures that are living in this area, along with the native English residents who already live there. So we want to just kind of reach out to everyone and make it a very multicultural church from day one, and make that established when we're going out and doing our evangelism. We're not just going to one group of people, but we're traveling through the different areas of Newham, trying to reach all of the people groups. Over.
Okay, so at Broken Table Church, we're going to need a launch team to help establish our launch service. We want our team to be made out of Newham natives. It's going to take some time to find some Christians that are indigenous to the culture, but we want to make sure that we are very intentional in doing that so we can reach people best where they're at. Forming the team will be through relationships. Ads won't really work with the Muslim people, so we'll be in community centers, local coffee shops, businesses, just to build those natural relationships. Also, we can have some leaders on loan from other churches, like East Newham, for example, since we're very similar. And then when we ask for volunteers, we also want to make sure we get volunteers that have families, because our population is going to be so heavily populated with kids that we want kids to reach kids. Also, there's going to be one launch team member for every 10 people we expect to be at the service. And also, to keep commitment to the launch team, we're going to set a time limit on it. So we don't want people thinking they're giving a life commitment when they commit to serving on this launch team. And then lastly, we really want a great launch team, and there's going to be people that come to us that we necessarily can't put on the launch team. We have to be very intentional and deliberate in making sure we scan people and just make sure that we're doing the best thing for God's kingdom.
Hey guys, so we're just going to talk a little bit about our prayer team. So prayer, we believe, is essential for when we're trying to start a church plant. So some things we want to talk about our prayer team is, so as members of our leadership team, as they go to England, we want them to be constantly in prayer and connection with people that are in the United States or with churches around the area. So we'll be asking each leadership team member to require for them to have a prayer system network, whether that be 2 people or 5 people or even more. We would love that. Also, we want our church plant to be developing healthy habits of spending time in prayer and as a group. And so we'll have designated times that we would love to pray together. Also, our leadership team will spend time in prayer together each week as a family, and just knowing that, seeing what Christ is going to do through our church plant. We also want each individual person to have a personal prayer time. We're requiring each person of our leadership team, of our launch team, and those potential members that we would be discipling, will require them to be in prayer constantly. We're also talking and asking for prayer partners. We'll be asking each person to update bi-weekly, so every 2 weeks. So thanks, guys.
So when our church planting team gets to Newham, we'll be following the apostolic harvest model, which is essentially we'll be coming into Newham, planting our church, and then eventually passing off leadership to locals. So this is all to avoid paternalism. We'll be involving all members of the community at all different levels. And obviously this is just going to leave the leadership team open in Newham to eventually start new churches, to plant churches. And additionally, we're really going for a multi-ethnic church plant also. We'll be having people from lots of different countries, lots of different backgrounds coming in to this church. And this is such a beautiful reflection of heaven one day, of Revelation 7, 9, and 10, just what heaven is going to be like. This is just a beautiful example of the ministry of reconciliation.
So for the ecclesiological model of Broken Table Church, we'll be doing for our church government structure, basically just a board of pastors and elders and deacons and deaconesses. The pastors and elders will be specifically designated for those of us who are on the leadership team. So we'll have a preaching pastor, a discipleship, a small group pastor, an evangelism pastor, a children's pastor, and a worship pastor. And the deacons and deaconesses will work to serve the needs of the people, the physical needs of the people, and the humanitarian needs of the people, such as ESL classes and assistance with immigration.
So to advertise our actual launch service, we're going to have several mailings that go out just so that people in the community are aware of the church and aware of the times and date of our first service. We will also do several online outreach programs through social media and different elements like that so that people can see this in ways that are best for them. So if they want mail and that's how they prefer to receive information, they'll have that opportunity. If they would rather see things online, they'll have that opportunity as well. We'll also do this through word of mouth and in the community centers and coffee shops that we are building our teams at and doing evangelism in. We'll be talking about the launch service so that people have a myriad of ways to just kind of hear about the service and know that it's happening. One location that we could utilize for this launch service is the Well Community Center, which is already established in Newham, and it seats about 120 people. There's already a children's center. There's room to have different discipleship classes. There's already like a handicap accessible building with different codes that have already been met for the area in Newham. So that would be a really great location for us to use so that we're not having to build a church and find the funding and the land to do that. Throughout our entire church planning process, but especially in the launch, we want to be focused on growing the church. So at our services, we will hand out connect cards to people so that they can fill those out and put their contact information and their name and if they have any specific prayer request. And then our leadership team and the launch team can kind of go through those and start contacting people to kind of encourage them to come back to church, pray with them, invite them to become involved in the small groups, and just really reach out intentionally to them. We also want to have a sort of potluck dinner so that we can kind of combine our experiences and then blend that with the cultural experiences of the people that we're reaching. So instead of having the traditional fried chicken and green beans and mashed potatoes that we're all used to, we're going to invite people to bring dishes that they'd like to share, and then we'll bring some of our own traditional dishes. That way there's things there for everyone of all the different cultures and backgrounds to be able to eat and enjoy, as just a way for the whole church to come together and start building that community and family relationship within the church, and just kind of give them different ways to see that the church is not just the worship service on Sunday mornings, but it's a body of believers working together for Christ.
In the United States, 96% of church growth is due to transfer growth and not conversion growth. So part of the goal of Broken Table Church will be to change that culture in the church in the area that we'll be serving in. Evangelism for us is when people are challenged directly with the gospel message and invited to respond to that message. The method of evangelism that we will employ as the pastors and elders at Broken Table Church it'll probably change over time just because based on the needs of the community. But we know that throughout all the methods, we know that evangelism needs to be intentional. And so building relationships with the unchurched is going to be essential. So we're going to have a lot of different outreach opportunities to reach the community and develop relationships with people, and understand that our relationships with people are not to develop prospects for the gospel, but to reach people with the gospel. So that's basically what the gist of our evangelism strategy is going to be at Broken Table Church.
So spiritual formation will take place on every level of ministry at Broken Table Church. So whether that is within small groups, whether that's in our children's ministry, youth ministry, whatever, it's going to take place. Spiritual formation in a local body of believers is so important, and it should be done through discipleship strategies. But we found that many church planners have a difficult time quantifying this practice of spiritual formation within their congregation. So for us, in order to assess spiritual formation and development within our church, we'll be giving out an assessment to our members to kind of, in a way, test their biblical understanding. This ministerial service in the church and throughout the community will also be tested, and then their evangelistic endeavors will help greatly in establishing a basis for evaluation. So are they sharing the gospel? Are they telling their friends about Jesus? Different things like that. And then just to emphasize, there will be discipleship taking place on every level for every individual person in the congregation, and that goes for our leadership team as well. They'll not be left out in this. The purpose of Broken Table Church's small groups is to build a community that serves together and comes closer together, but more importantly, closer to God. The core values of our small groups are to love God.
Of our church, we want worship to be very multicultural and include different elements from all the countries that are represented in our congregation. So to do that, we will leave it very free of both size of the worship team and style of worship. We expect that when we launch the service, the worship team will be fairly small because we won't have had time to have as many new believers that may have the talent necessary to help lead in worship. But as the church grows, we want the worship team to grow and reflect that. We want to include a blend of languages, so some English, since they are living in England and learning English, but also some of the native languages, such as Hindi and Bangladeshi and Pakistani. We also want to include art in our worship because art is something that is used a lot in these cultures that we're trying to reach. So both art hanging on the walls of the church to help make that a sacred space dedicated to worship, but also art as a participatory experience during the worship service. We also want to highlight the connection between all members of those leading in worship. So the pastor, the music teams, the art teams, we want those all communicating from day one so that we make sure that they're on the same page and all presenting the same theology, the same doctrines to the church as one cohesive unit, not divisive groups.
So for the preaching at Broken Table Church, the lead preaching pastor will seek to teach the scripture in an expositional way, verse by verse, and hopefully in the process disciple someone along the way who is indigenous in the culture to become the lead preaching pastor at Broken Table Church. So the sermons will probably most likely last between 35 and 45 minutes depending on the week, and the pastor will seek to preach through each pericope that occurs in the biblical text, just to offer the congregation a more fuller sense of what the scripture is saying, and allowing the scripture to speak for itself.
So one of the main reasons why church plants exist is to eventually plant new churches. So the goal of our church, obviously, is to make disciples of Jesus Christ, and then eventually for those disciples to go out and start their own church. So we're going to be doing a lot of our evangelistic encounters through our small groups. So because of that, when people are going out and sharing the gospel and doing those different things, we kind of want small groups to be forming from our lay leaders within the church for them to eventually be starting smaller churches, starting and baptizing this group of believers in this community, and then forming local churches. So because we're kind of following the apostolic model, we aren't wanting to have sole leadership over our church. We want the indigenous people to be leading it, and then that will free us up to leave eventually, just kind of like what Paul did, for us to leave and go and plant wherever the Lord eventually then calls us.